Clarity doesn't arrive gently. That's the first lie you were told. You were told that understanding would calm you, that insight would soften the edges, that once you figured it out, you would finally rest. That was never true. Clarity does not soothe, it sharpens. Peace is what you feel when tension disappears. Clarity is what you feel when tension becomes visible. They are not the same. You've been chasing peace. That's understandable. Peace sounds responsible, healthy, mature. Clarity sounds dangerous. So you delayed it. You told yourself you didn't need answers yet, that you were still processing, that time would bring perspective. But time doesn't bring clarity. Attention does. And attention has consequences. Because once you see something clearly, you are responsible for what you see. That's why clarity hurts. It removes plausible deniability. Before clarity, you could say, "I didn't realize." After clarity, that sentence is no longer available. That's the cost. You didn't avoid clarity because you were afraid of truth. You avoided it because you were afraid of obligation. Clarity doesn't demand action immediately, but it makes inaction conscious. And conscious inaction is unbearable. So you confused peace with numbness. You learned how to quiet internal noise, how to settle agitation, how to smooth over discomfort. You mistook silence for resolution. But silence is not peace. It's postponement without a deadline. You became very good at postponing. You learned techniques: distraction, productivity, rationalization. You learned how to calm your nervous system without addressing what disturbed it. That worked until it didn't, because calming without clarity creates stagnation, and stagnation feels heavy. Not painful, heavy, like carrying something you can't set down because you no longer remember where you picked it up. When clarity finally begins, it doesn't arrive as insight. It arrives as friction, a sense that something is misaligned, that the words you say don't match the weight you feel, that your life makes sense but doesn't feel true. You start noticing small inconsistencies, the way your body reacts before your mind catches up, the way you hesitate before agreeing, the way enthusiasm feels rehearsed. These aren't problems, they're signals. But signals are disruptive. They interrupt flow. They threaten the systems you rely on. So you label them stress, or burnout, or overthinking. You look for ways to restore peace. You don't ask what clarity is trying to show you, because clarity doesn't offer relief. It offers precision, and precision cuts. Clarity strips away comforting explanations. It doesn't ask why you did something. It shows you what it cost. It doesn't argue. It reveals. And revelation is not gentle. You feel it when a familiar justification stops working, when a reason you've repeated for years suddenly sounds hollow, when you say something out loud and hear yourself saying it. That moment, that slight internal pause, that's clarity beginning. It doesn't shout. It waits. It waits to see if you'll notice. Most people don't. They rush past it. They film the silence. They correct the thought before it finishes forming. Because clarity destabilizes identity. If you see clearly, you may have to admit that some choices were not accidents, that some compromises were not temporary, that some patterns were not imposed on you, that you participated willingly, repeatedly. Clarity makes agency unavoidable. That's why peace is so appealing. Peace allows you to rest without reckoning. Clarity does not allow rest. It keeps asking the same question in different forms. Why this? Why now? Why continue? You hoped clarity would bring forgiveness. It doesn't. It brings accuracy. And accuracy is neutral. It doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care about effort. It doesn't care about how hard you tried. It shows what is. That's all. You don't feel relieved when clarity arrives. You feel exposed, because the story you told yourself collapses. Not violently, quietly. You realize that the tension you've been managing was never going away. You were just carrying it more efficiently. You were confusing endurance with resolution. Clarity shows you the difference. Peace is the absence of disturbance. Clarity is the end of confusion. Confusion is comfortable. It allows hope without commitment. Clarity removes hope's ambiguity. It forces specificity, and specificity demands choice. You thought peace was the goal. It never was. Peace is a byproduct. Sometimes. Clarity is a threshold. Once crossed, you can't return to not knowing. You can pretend. You can distract yourself. You can delay. But you can't unknow. That's why people resist clarity. Not because it's painful, but because it's irreversible. Once you see the pattern, you can't call it coincidence. Once you see the cost, you can't call it unavoidable. Once you see yourself choosing, you can't call it fate. Clarity takes away your favorite hiding places. You don't lose comfort immediately. You lose excuses. And excuses are a form of shelter. You've been living in them, carefully arranged, well maintained, socially acceptable. Clarity collapses them, not with force, with light. And light doesn't negotiate. You begin to notice how often you tolerate what you don't respect, how often you accept what you quietly resent, how often you stay because leaving would require admitting something. Clarity doesn't tell you what to do. That's another lie. It doesn't instruct. It reveals. What you do with that revelation is your burden. Peace would have told you it's okay. Clarity does not say that. Clarity says, this is the trade you're making. And then it waits. You wanted peace because you wanted rest. What you actually wanted was relief from responsibility. Clarity doesn't offer that. It gives responsibility back, fully, without commentary. You feel the weight of it when you realize that many of your problems are maintained, not imposed. That many of your frustrations are familiar by choice. That many of your limits are negotiated daily. Clarity shows you the invisible agreements you've been honoring. Agreements with expectations, with roles, with versions of yourself you no longer recognize. Peace would have helped you cope. Clarity forces you to confront. Confrontation doesn't look dramatic. It looks quiet. It looks like you sitting with a realization and not immediately doing anything about it. That's the hardest part. Not acting, not fixing, not reframing, just seeing. Clarity doesn't rush. It doesn't need urgency. It knows it has time. Once it enters, it stays. It waits for the moment when avoidance becomes more painful than action. That moment is not predictable. It arrives differently for everyone, but it always arrives. You felt it already. That subtle tightening when you consider continuing as you are. That heaviness when you imagine another year like this. Not worse, just the same. Clarity doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't threaten collapse. It simply asks you to project forward, honestly. And honesty is exhausting because it removes fantasy. Peace would have let you dream about change. Clarity asks you to count the cost, to admit what you're willing to lose, what you're unwilling to sacrifice. What you've been pretending is temporary. Clarity is not peaceful. It's clarifying. And clarity exposes conflict. Internal conflict you've been smoothing over for years. Conflict between comfort and integrity, between familiarity and truth, between who you are and who you appear to be. Peace would have numbed that conflict. Clarity illuminates it. You don't feel calm when clarity settles in. You feel awake, alert, uneasy. You notice how often you avoid stillness, because stillness allows clarity to speak. Noise keeps it at bay, so you stay busy, engaged, occupied. You call it productivity. It's actually avoidance with structure. Clarity doesn't accuse you. It doesn't need to. It lets you accuse yourself. Not harshly, accurately. You realize that many of your coping mechanisms exist to prevent you from seeing something specific. Not everything, just one thing. The thing you already know. The thing you've been circling. The thing you keep promising to address later. Clarity doesn't care about later. It exists only in now. Peace can wait. Clarity cannot. Once clarity arrives, you're no longer deciding blindly. You're deciding knowingly. That's heavier. That's why peace feels preferable. Peace allows you to sleep. Clarity keeps you awake. Not anxious. Aware. Awareness is tiring because it removes autopilot. You can't move without noticing movement. You can't agree without noticing hesitation. You can't comply without noticing resistance. Clarity makes life more demanding, not easier. That's why it's rare. That's why people talk about wanting it, but structure their lives to avoid it. You don't feel peaceful when you see clearly. You feel responsible, and responsibility is not comforting. It's grounding. It roots you in consequence. You can still choose comfort. Clarity doesn't forbid it. But comfort becomes a conscious choice, no longer an accident, no longer a default. That's the difference. Peace would have allowed you to drift. Clarity forces you to stand somewhere. Even if you don't move yet, even if you do nothing, Standing still with awareness is not the same as drifting unconsciously. One is a pause, the other is avoidance. You can feel the difference now. The discomfort you feel listening to this is not disturbance, it's orientation. Your internal compass recalibrating, not pointing to happiness, pointing to truth. Truth is not soothing, it's stabilizing. But stability doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels exposed, like standing without armor. You don't get relief for seeing clearly. You get obligation to yourself, to what you know. And once you know, the question changes. It's no longer, how do I feel? It becomes, what am I doing with what I see? Peace would have asked you to rest. Clarity asks you to decide. Not now, not dramatically, just honestly. And honesty is the one thing you can't delegate. You can delay it, you can soften it, you can surround it with noise, but you can't avoid it forever, because clarity doesn't leave. It waits, quietly, patiently, until the gap between what you know and what you continue to do becomes too wide to ignore. And when that happens, when awareness finally outweighs comfort, when peace is no longer convincing, when clarity has finished revealing, the only thing left unresolved, the only thing still open, is whether you will use what you see, or whether you will keep mistaking silence for peace, while knowing precisely what that choice costs, and still choosing to look away just long enough to avoid answering the question clarity has already placed directly in front of you, and is still waiting for you to stop pretending you don't see it.